Kaori O'Connor is Senior Research Fellow at University College London. She is the author of several acclaimed works, including a recent study of the English breakfast, as well as a global history of the pineapple. She's currently working on a global history of seaweed, which I think is going to be published next year.
Yes, hopefully. And, hopefully everyone will rush. It is a commodity of the future.
Yes.
Whereas you and I have often talked a lot about the commodities of the past.
Yes, we have.
What they have to show us.
And from the variety of your works, it seems that you are interested in a very rich range of commodities. Now, I was wondering, from your anthropological perspective, how would you define a commodity?
So my view of commodity is something that's really connected to everything else. And the breakthrough study that linked up you and me and our fields is sweetness and power. Mintz's study of sugar, where he showed how this commodity, moved whole populations around the globe, and then came to Europe, where it transformed eating patterns, reflected social hierarchies, also helped to change them, and finally, as we see today, which is slightly after his book ends, we're struggling with the legacy of our sugar obsession in health problems.
Of course, as you say, Mintz was a pioneering study. I think his work on sweetness and power did influence a whole generation of subsequent anthropological studies. I was wondering if you could say a little more about what do anthropological perspectives bring to commodities? What do they actually contribute of their own, which perhaps historians or geographers maybe don't, in your view?
Okay. Well, we say that commodities have agency, which sounds to other people like anthropological doublespeak. I mean, what do you mean by that? But what we mean is that, as with sugar, commodities take on a social meaning, and they both reflect society and social change. They reflect it, but they also affect it, like sugar did, both, in terms of the social life and in terms of things like health. So commodities are not just an inert thing with value that we place on it. They actually become part of a society and take on a life of their own. And you see that very clearly with sugar. And for example, now, sugar is a substance. It is thought to be a bad substance. At other times, it's been good. It has moral value. It's used as a metaphor for things. So that's what I mean. I mean, it's not just the production figures. It's not just how global trade in sugar transformed commerce from, let's say, through the 19th century to now. It's the part that it plays in our society, because anthropologists tend to look more at the society in question rather than, the large global sweep of a historian.
Right, that's very interesting. And in terms of looking at this whole society, is there a particular place to look at gender issues? Would you say?
Well, gender issues, yes, they can be very interesting. I mean, many... For example, if you take a look at the commodities of empire, you find a really, really fun gender divide. The economic history of the empire period in terms of the goods that came in from the colonies. It's all very masculine. It's all very, about the production, the distribution, and the political ramifications of the empire's different submarkets. But back in the home country, where many of these products came, you have an entirely female approach. It's the role that it played in the home, how it transformed nutrition and cookery, which is something that, of course, affects everyone on one level, but was entirely female. And so, when you had the Empire Marketing Board. Now, the Empire Marketing Board was a wonderful organization that was set up in the 1920s to basically sell the commodities of empire to the home consumer. This was just at the point at which women were emerging as the buying agents and purchasers for the family. The Empire Marketing Board had to invent an entirely new way of appealing to the female consumer. And they did that, for example, not by taking out, advertisements as you would to a man, say, invest in stocks or, this is a good thing. They had to do it by printing recipes and giving them away, saying, use Australian sultanas, use South African, dried pears, things like that. So that's one very clear way that the understanding and use of commodities can be gendered.
Right. Perhaps you'd now like to tell us about your favorite commodity from all those that you've studied. Which would you describe as being your favorite?
Well, all right, my favorite is tapioca. Most people say, because most of us had a run-in with tapioca at school. Now, in America, where I'm from, it was a childhood favorite. But we always had it chilled with lots of vanilla. It was delicious. And I was shocked to discover that people in Britain had it warm, unsweetened, unflavored, with a dab of jam on the top, and it was like eating old-fashioned library paste. Horrible. But you see, it's a New World plant. Cassava, tapioca, and manioc are all the same plant. And that's thrown people off the scent. But the interesting thing is, it's a classic commodity in two ways. The first way is it was a commodity of an empire other than ours. It was a root that was grown, that comes from Brazil, present-day Brazil. The first Portuguese colonists got there, and European plants wouldn't grow. They almost died of starvation. And they noticed the Indians eating this root, this manioc, which is poisonous, but they knew how to process it. The colonists did not want to eat a native food because they thought it would turn them into natives, and they would lose their civilization and culture. They truly did, and some of the native foods, like snakes, were off-putting. But in the end, they had to eat this, and if it weren't for this manioc, the colony would not have survived. Okay, so this is nice. They've learned to eat this root. And there are two other things about this. Not only is it poisonous, it requires almost no effort to grow. You stick it in the ground, it grows itself, and then you can leave it there. You don't have to harvest it after a time, so it's safe from marauders. Now the thing about it is, though, Brazil was also one of the first sugar economies, and that depended on slavery, and therefore it was also the beginning of the slave trade.
Yes.
First African traders, slave traders came to Brazil. Now, when they realized what a good cheap food this was, the first slavers took the manioc, cassava, to West Africa, where they used it to fuel, to feed the slaves as they came over. But the slaves came from the interior mainly, and when it was realized what a good food this was, the root goes all the way into the center of Africa, where it transforms the native economy. And it's at this time you get the great warrior societies, slaving kingdoms of Central Africa that provided all the slaves. They were able to do it because this cassava manioc required so little attention that it freed the men from agricultural labor to become warriors who could then enslave the opposition and sell them on. So in that sense, it completely transformed the economy of Africa as well, and moved whole populations from one part of the world to the other. But at the same time, this tapioca goes around not the Atlantic, the Pacific, and it naturalizes. It doesn't become associated with slavery, but it is used by the Orientals as a cash crop, and they discover how to refine it in a very different way to make the tapioca that we all ate as children. And it's to me amazing to discover that this one humble root had such an effect, and yet today we have tapioca on the one hand, cassava on the other, and we have no idea of the original, that they were the same to begin with.
Right. Is that why you've described tapioca as a hidden commodity?
Oh, that's right. Yes, I forgot. Because the thing is, this was never exported, and so it didn't show in the export figures.
Right.
So when we look at commodities, instead of just looking at the statistics, beloved, of economic historians, we have to look at the undeclared stuff that might have been traveling in the hold, but which made the whole system work. It's just like in the Brazilian material, you have wonderful statistics about how much sugar was produced, per plantation, per acre, but very little, if anything, on what the slaves were eating. What are the commodities that allowed the other commodities to be produced? That's the kind of thing an anthropologist would look at, but a classic economic historian would not. That's why we need each other.
Right, and talking about sort of new ideas and new perspectives, there is currently a great deal of interest amongst geographers, historians, and development scholars about the whole issue of environment and environmental sustainability. Have anthropologists also moved in this direction, to your knowledge?
We were always there. Because all of the societies that we studied when anthropology was being formed were by definition sustainable, because if they weren't sustainable, they wouldn't exist. And these are people living in highly specialized environments who had developed their own ways of extracting, managing, sustaining, and living on what their territory had to offer. So for us, it's something that's always been there. We, as anthropology developed through particularly the 50s and the 60s, began to see these holistic, balanced, sustainable systems disappear. Anthropologists were among the first to say, it's disappearing. But then modernity and modernizing was such a powerful push. People said, you're just being, colonial romantics. You don't know what you're talking about. And it was brushed aside. Well, then, things caught up with the anthropologist. And so now people come and they say, well, what were the traditional methods? How did they use this land before we went over to monoculture, before there was population die-off, or before people moved from the country to the cities and lost it all? And so anthropologists do have some of that old technology. But what anthropologists are doing now, of course, is moving into another field, which is how sustainable is sustainable. So are GMO crops that can feed large populations, well, is that really sustainable? What are the knock-on health effects down the road? And of course, there are many who say, GMO crops can do damage to, say, your immune system, but you only see this, say, after 20 years of consuming it or in the next generation. So, but that's where we are now. So we've always had it, and we're moving ahead.
Excellent. So is that reflected in will that be reflected in your new book, which will come out next year as well?
Oh, seaweed.
Yes.
Well, absolutely, because the wonderful thing about seaweed is it's always been there. One of my favorite things is, people think, seaweed, it's nobody eats it, or it's just a few natives somewhere, no importance. And you say, well, how do you think mankind or humankind, how do you think they began? I mean, it's always the old romantic idea of there were dinosaurs, we killed dinosaurs, we ate dinosaurs, the paleo diet, we were meat eaters, but no. What isotope analysis shows on very old sites is the first settlements on the hold were along the coast. And if you think of it, it's a lot easier to eat seaweed and pick shellfish and get coastal fish than it is to sort of kill a raptor or whatever they were killing. And seaweed was a great source, very nutritious, very digestible, and full of minerals. So it's one of humankind's earliest and best foods. So it has been ignored, but it sits there in the sea, and in most places, the sea is still pure. This is stuff that doesn't biodegrade the environment like so much of what we do. You can farm seaweed without any investment. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful food, and it's just there for the taking, not just as food, but it can be turned into biofuel. It can be, let's say, made into polymer-based new surfaces. There are endless applications. So it's definitely a future food.
Well, I very much look forward to reading the book. Kaori, thank you very much.
Thank you.